Tonight on the Daily Debrief.
Not only did he fall in love with her, he became obsessed with her.
Did a relationship with this European webcam girl lead to the killing of a family? Even the defense admits
this is kind of an unusual thing. Granted, this is something, to do with this Bulgarian lady.
As neighbors try to piece together the state's timeline.
That was strange to hear gunfire at that time of night.
And a juror is kicked off the case of a couple accused of abusing their stepdaughter to death. Plus, friends and experts shed light on the relationship between a college student and the mother and stepfather she admits to shooting. Also, the case of the accused millionaire pervert is back in federal court. The Daily Debrief recaps today in court. It's Wednesday, July 31st. Welcome to the Debrief, everybody. Julie Rendelman here after a long hiatus. Linda Kenny Baden along as well this evening. Juries are deliberating in two cases we're following, so let's start with the trial of a Florida man prosecutors say killed his family over an obsession with a Bulgarian webcam model. 29-year-old Grant Amato is accused of sending the woman $200,000 from his mother, Margaret, his father, Chad, and his brother, Cody, so that she would keep talking to him. When his parents intervened and tried to shut down the relationship, prosecutors say Grant Amato murdered his family. Before we get to the closing arguments, let's hear a neighbor describe what is believed to be the shooting.
It was between 8:30 and 9:30 at night. I heard gunshots, and I heard them one right after another. And I know that it was less than 5 shots fired, because at the time, I made a mental note that was strange to hear gunfire at that time of night. I mean, it had been dark then for hours.
You know that it was less than 5 shots? Mm-hmm. More? Yes.
Yes, I do. Less than 5 shots.
More than a particular number?
I know it's more than one. I didn't count them. I just, as I was listening, I know it was less than 5. And more than one.
And it was successive, in other words, one right after another.
Yes, it was one right after another.
Here are some of the forensic pathologist's findings as to the injuries on the victims. At least 2 of the victims showed signs of a fight or a beating, and all were shot at a distance beyond 2 to 3 feet.
Describe the external appearance of Margaret Amato's head.
There were gunshot wounds identified on her face and head, and of note, on the left occipital scalp, which is the back of the head on the left side, there was an oval gunshot wound entrance. The other wound on the right cheek was an exit wound. I saw bullet entry wounds present behind the right ear and on the back of the head. Beginning on the back of the right ear, there's a gunshot wound entrance. And this one was associated with some kind of abrasions on the back of the ear, and it was focally lacerated, or the skin was torn. And I noticed that it went through the ear, and then it re-entered through the tragus, which is an area that's commonly pierced by some people of the ear, and it re-enters into the cranial cavity and then exits on the right forehead. He had some injuries that would be described as blunt force trauma, or something that is non-sharp impacting the body that causes either a scrape or a tear or a bruise. So on the right cheek, there's a gunshot wound entrance. And finally, on the back of the head, there was a gunshot wound exit. And I did observe areas of blunt force trauma on his body, with the exception of his head. Well, actually, including portions of his head.
The defense called a crime scene analyst who has been on the stand before to testify again about drugs in the home the victims and the defendant shared. The prosecution tried to deflate the theory that a random killer with a drug connection may have committed the killings.
You previously testified, I believe last week, that marijuana was found in the home. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Okay. And the armoire that you located that was created for possibly growing marijuana, you did not find any plants growing, is that correct?
That's correct.
And you previously testified that there was no evidence of sale in the home, is that correct?
That's correct.
So no ledgers to indicate drug transactions?
That's correct.
No scales?
That's correct.
No baggies or maybe labeling mechanisms.
That's correct.
And you did not find any cocaine in the house.
That's correct.
No meth.
That's correct.
No heroin.
That's correct.
So it's fair to say the Amatos like to smoke some pot.
That's correct.
Okay.
The defense also called another neighbor to question whether the shootings may have occurred the next morning, much later than the prosecution believes. Now, if true, the defense says this raises serious doubts with the state's theory.
Now, when you were out on your driveway on the morning of January 25th, 2019, did you hear gunshots?
I don't know what I heard. No, I did not.
Did you hear a popping sound?
Yes, sir, I did.
Did you hear multiple popping sounds?
3. 1, then 2 after that.
Did you speak to police when they came around asking about this case?
No.
You never spoke to police?
Yes, I did.
Okay.
Later on that morning.
Okay. Did you tell them you heard gunshots?
It sounded like gunshots, but I wasn't 100% sure.
Sure, I understand. No
Yeah.
problem. No problem.
Yeah.
Did they sound like gunshots, these popping sounds that you heard?
Well, I've never heard a gun go off inside of a house, and I don't know how big of a gun was used at this crime. I heard popping sounds.
Okay.
It was just unusual to hear those popping sounds that early in the morning.
During closing arguments, the state said this shooting was not the act of a random intruder who perhaps had a drug connection to the victim's family.
Grant fell in love with a woman named Sylvie. Not only did he fall in love with her, he became obsessed with her, to the point where that was all that mattered to him. He had lost his job, he was depressed, he was having a contentious relationship with his father and his brother. He finds Sylvie and becomes consumed with her. Now, you haven't seen these, they're in evidence. But these are bank records from the Amatos. Okay? Credit card statements, checking account statements. According to my notes, $20,000 in one night.
And that was just some of the money. The defense said the state failed to present forensic evidence to link the defendant to the shootings.
Don't check your common sense at the door, okay? A lot of families have crisis, whether it be drugs, whether, it could be a lot of things. This is kind of an unusual thing. Granted, this is something, to do with this Bulgarian lady, but nevertheless, Grant was part of the family. The family was pulling together. The first hotel that Grant went to, that's an important crime scene. Nothing was found, no blood, no blood, no DNA of anyone else, nothing incriminating was found. And that goes back to the scene. That was a bloody mess. How in the world was Grant Amato able to do all these things without getting a scintilla of blood on himself?
We've got a big lawyer word there, so let's bring the lawyers into discussion along with myself. With me tonight, former prosecutor Julie Rendelman, criminal defense attorney Linda Kenny Baden. So Julie, the defense seemed to be quaking a little bit there, at least in my opinion, during the closings. Is it zealous advocacy for your client if you're saying things like, well, this is a bizarre case, and you're sort of like backpedaling and then going forward during the closings?
I'm not sure that he's necessarily backpedaling. I think he's a little confused as to how to deal with this issue of this woman that he was having this quote-unquote relationship with, and I don't think he handled it well, and therefore, to me, it didn't come off as a very strong argument, at least that part of it, when it came to what he was presenting to the jury. So I don't think it was backpedaling. I think he just couldn't figure out how to deal with it, and he should have.
Linda Kenny Baden, how would you have handled it if you were the defense attorney in that case?
Ladies and gentlemen, you heard evidence that Cody was shot in the right cheek. This is somebody looking at him, even from here. You mean that brother who took him to Japan, who paid his bills, who loved him, and he loved him back, would shoot him and let his brothers see that he shoot him all over some Bulgarian woman? Didn't happen.
Okay, so this leads to another question that we were talking about earlier, Linda, and that is if the defendant killed the parents because they cut him off from the webcam model, Why did he kill the brother who apparently loved him so much and who he exchanged these letters that we heard about in the trial that the brother was trying to help him out? How did it go down?
Boy, I think that's where you've gotten it, Aaron. This is what I think the jury's going to be hung up on. Either he's a madman, this guy's a true monster, right? He has no morals because the brother loved him and paid for him, or the brother came upon him killing or setting up the scene, and what happened is they got into an argument and he had to kill him.
And Julie Rendelman is nodding in agreement that maybe that's how this went down.
Yeah, look, I mean, I don't know that he has to be so evil. I think we assume that based on the relationship, quote unquote, that he had with this woman, that something is not quite right with this young man. And so, it doesn't, it's not crazy to imagine that someone who is cut off from what they believe is a relationship, which isn't a relationship, and he's no longer able to provide money, that he's going to snap. Now, obviously, you don't normally kill your family members, but I think the assumption would be that the brother perhaps walked in on it.
And finally, Julie, this defense theory that maybe somebody random who was associated with a drug trade came in and killed these people randomly or over some kind of a drug debt or something, does that raise reasonable doubt, or is it just laughable?
Well, I don't know that it's laughable. I think the state, in the quick snippet we saw, kind of covered that ground by saying there wasn't real drugs in the house. There was like a little marijuana in the house. This was certainly, there weren't ledgers. There was nothing to indicate that this was like a real drug den of which people would want them killed.
Linda, we will be back to you and Julie at the end of the broadcast here. Complaints about the Law&Crime network came today in the trial of a Georgia husband and wife accused of murdering their 2-year-old foster child. Joseph and Jennifer Rosenbaum face different degrees of murder and other charges over the death of Layla Marie Daniel. The judge agreed to remove a juror after a local newspaper reporter had a conversation with the juror at a nearby lunch stand. There are several versions of the story as to who said what, but both the prosecution and the defense agreed to remove the juror to be safe. The defense complained that coverage of the case, including ours, might be influencing the jury. The prosecution said there was no evidence that jurors were actually watching the coverage, which, of course, they've been warned not to do by the court. The defense further complained about analysis on this network by Georgia Juvenile Court Judge Ashley Wilcott as unethical for a judge. Judge Wilcott proceeded to respond to that criticism today.
As you know, yes, I serve as a legal analyst. I'm also a judge pro tem in the state of Georgia in a juvenile court. What that means by definition is it's usually a practicing attorney, which I am, who's appointed to serve for a specific case or trial calendar, and who therefore serves as a judge temporarily rather than on a continuing basis. So I am not a full-time judge that is on the bench every day. I serve temporarily at the pleasure of the judge in juvenile court who asks me to serve on that particular day for that particular trial calendar. So, yes, there are also things that I cannot comment on, anything before that court, for instance. This is not one of those cases. This is a case in which I certainly can offer legal analysis. And I know you've heard me say, and I've said it many, many times on many different shows, and that is, I believe in our justice system. I believe in the jury system. I believe that juries are sophisticated, that they are capable of listening to the evidence presented, hearing the testimony, and coming to a decision based on that. I believe in that system. A lot of times in trials, defense attorneys or attorneys try to say, listen, and it can be prosecution as well, live media trial coverage has created a bias that's impartially affected the trial proceeding. Guess what? Legal analysts don't do that. Live coverage doesn't do that. Media coverage doesn't do that. Rather, if a jury member listens to that or watches that when they've been instructed to not to by a court, that's when it might unfairly prejudice a client. So, to blame media, to blame me as a legal analyst, I believe is far-reaching. It is about the conduct of the jury members and the judiciary appropriately handling it with integrity.
A few other thoughts on this. While the defense has a duty to defend the defendants, the defense cherry-picked parts of our analysis to complain about coverage of the case. We've argued about whether the state has enough evidence to link Joseph Rosenbaum to the case on previous versions of this broadcast, and we've questioned whether the defendants could have mistaken a natural seizure for a choking episode and done more harm than good by starting CPR rather than calling 911. If the latter is true, then the defendants should not be convicted on many of the charges they face. At least that's my opinion. The defense did not point out these facts of the coverage to the judge. And still ahead tonight here on The Debrief, strange details about a millionaire pedophile wishing to populate the world with his DNA, and then the case of a Florida student accused of killing her mother and stepfather. A psychotherapist explains those voices in her head she says led her to kill. Federal prosecutors have amassed millions of pages of evidence against Jeffrey Epstein. That word came out of a hearing against the millionaire pedophile facing new federal charges. He's accused of abusing a number of victims when they were underage in a trial prosecutors predict will last at least a month. The New York Times is reporting that Epstein told scientists he wanted to, quote, seed the human race with his DNA by impregnating 20 women at his property in New Mexico. The trial of rap artist ASAP Rocky is on hold today in Sweden. The American artist is accused of assault, but he says he's not guilty and acted only in self-defense because he believed he was going to be attacked. Prosecutors say videos posted online by ASAP Rocky were edited to make the rapper look innocent. The case there in Sweden will resume tomorrow. Testimony from friends, relatives, and psychotherapists discussing the trial of a Florida student accused of killing her mother and stepfather. Nicole Nachtman is raising an insanity defense involving schizophrenia. She's also raising battered child syndrome as self-defense, saying she was beaten, that her mother was controlling, and that she finally snapped back. One of the defendant's friends testified that the defendant went through great lengths to try to please her mother nonetheless.
She said that to work out, to lose weight. Her mother wanted her to lose weight.
Are you aware of at some point Nicole changing her grades?
Aware of it, yes. She had a very strong odor. For the longest time, I thought it was because she didn't shower, but it turns out she did not wear deodorant. She wasn't taking care of herself.
Did at some point you start to see observations that Nicole may have been depressed or looked depressed?
Not really, but I could tell that she did not want to go back home in fear of her mom.
Another friend corroborated the story that the defendant tried to change her grades to please her mother.
To make them appear better.
And did you have an impression of why Ms. Nachtman was making the changes for the better to her grades to show to her mother?
She didn't want to disappoint her mom. That was a big fear for her.
Okay, it was a big fear for her?
Yes.
And how would you describe what you perceive to be the relationship that Ms. Nachtman had with her mother?
She was under her mom's thumb. She badly wanted to be approved by her mother, felt like she was constantly doing things to make sure that she got her mother's approval.
Was it your impression that Ms. Nachtman was being successful in getting her mother's approval?
No.
And why was that?
Just because of the fact that she continually tried to do things to make sure that her mother didn't find out about anything that she may have been disappointed in.
Next, the defendant's uncle described the relationship between the defendant and the two victims.
She was tough on Nicole.
She was tough on Nicole? Could you give us an example of what you mean by tough on Nicole?
Well, like one time she ran out of gas and all that. I went to help her get some gas in her car, and she, after I helped her out to get her gas and all that, and she told me don't tell her mom.
So Nicole at least was 16 years of age?
Yes, yes.
Okay. And apparently she ran out of gas?
Yes.
And at the time, was her mother living here in Florida?
Yes.
And she called you instead of her mom, is that correct?
Well, she couldn't get a hold of anyone. She called me, yes.
A psychotherapist testified that the defendant was at times giddy and at times depressed about what she did, and then tried to explain the voices the defendant said she heard in her head.
She said the screaming was louder in her head. I would characterize that as an auditory hallucination. She said that when she shot her stepfather, she was hearing it, and then after she shot her stepfather, the screaming dissipated. And then she heard it subsequently when her mother came back in that time period. So it wasn't continuous. She said when she shot her stepfather, there was thunder. Apparently it was quite loud. And the thunder, she believes, covered up the sound of the bullet, so the police did not come. And she thought that it was a sign that God was protecting her. But when Nicole shot her mom, the sky opened up for her. So she's taking this as another sign, somehow this is okay and she's going to be okay.
Returning now, our attorneys Julie Rendelman and Linda Kenny Baden. So Julie, okay, evidence of mental illness, perhaps, likely. Where do we sit on the line here, on the gamut, and then is it enough for legal justification?
I don't believe it's enough for legal justification. I'm not sure if I'm going to get some disagreement over here. Because
well, if so, it's welcome. I mean, anyone can disagree with you.
I'm so used to it. But yeah, I think there's no question that she's mentally ill. I don't even think the state says she's not mentally ill. But I believe that based on some of the, outlining information, including her actions both before, during, and after the incident, it indicates, at least to me, that she was well aware of what she was doing and was trying to cover her tracks, which to me indicates not the defense of mental disease.
I tend to agree with you, Julie. Linda, do you disagree?
No, I don't disagree, but I do think she needs treatment, and I'm not sure that it's a first degree, that maybe it should be a second degree murder. And ultimately, the penalty is irrelevant in that because she's going to be in jail almost her whole life. But whatever she does, she needs treatment in jail. She has schizophrenia, and clearly there was abuse going on in this family in terms of whatever the relationships were. Maybe not physical, but we know it when we see it, and even the biological dad cried over it. So I think that whatever the jury do, it could be second degree. I don't think they're going to say it.
We're in that tough situation where we're trying to decide the charge based on the possible punishment or the situation post-conviction, and that's the backwards of what we're supposed to do, of course, right, Julie?
It is, but then we start to wonder, well, was there a plea offer made? Was there an opportunity for her to plead to a lesser count, and she chose not to? I don't know the background of that, but that to me may have been the better solution than kind of putting everyone through it, including her entire family again.
My guess is that prosecutors may have wanted to move forward because there are a couple of nuggets of possible premeditation here, Linda.
There are, but the prosecution already said they weren't going to seek the death penalty because she wasn't the worst of the worst, so the prosecution may have felt they've done the deal for her already.
Well, we're going to have to dig into this a little bit more, perhaps after the trial is done, to see exactly what was going on, because these questions are obviously going to affect the outcome. Julie Rendelman, Linda Kenny Baden, good to see you here on the Debrief. That's all the time we have. Live trial coverage resuming at 9 a.m. We'll see you then. Take care.